Right now, we're getting new information about the focus of the January 6th Select Committee that's going beyond Trump allies to include the inner circle of former Vice President Mike Pence. Our special correspondent Jamie Gangel is here with her exclusive reporting. Jamie, so who is the committee targeting right now in Pence's inner circle?
Well, the committee is interested in at least 5 members of the Pence inner circle, according to 3 sources familiar with the effort. I worked with our colleagues Mike Warren and Zach Cohen on this. We are told that some individuals close to Pence may actually be willing to either voluntarily or under the guise of a friendly subpoena talk with the committee. According to our sources, some Pence aides are actually proving more willing to engage with the committee than has previously been made public. Among the aides, Wolf, are former Chief of Staff Mark Short, former Chief Counsel Greg Jacob, former National Security Advisor Keith Kellogg. We reached out to the aides who either did not respond or declined to comment. Clearly, they want to keep a low profile. But we did hear from House Committee Chairman Benny Thompson, who went on the record and said that some are cooperating. He said some yes and some no. But clearly, Wolf, the committee wants to talk to these people, and for the first time, we're hearing that some Pence aides are engaging with the committee.
You know, it's really interesting because there are some people out there who were very close to the vice president, and their information potentially could be very, very critical, right?
So let's talk about these 3. These are the inner circle. They have critical information. They were first-hand witnesses in the days leading up to January 6th and January 6th about how former President Trump and his allies were trying to pressure Pence to overturn the results of the election. Just take a look. Mark Short, Chief of Staff, Pence's closest aides, with him in the days leading up to January 6th in meetings, actually with him on January 6th up at the Capitol. I'm told there is a lot of interest in him. Second, Greg Jacob, former chief counsel. Jacob was critical in pushing back on one of Trump's lawyers that we now know about, John Eastman, who wrote that 2-page memo trying to justify Pence stopping the certification. I'm told Jacob played a critical role in countering those efforts and is a person of significant interest to the committee. And finally, among the group, Keith Kellogg, former National Security Advisor to Pence, who actually was with former President Trump most of the day on January 6th because National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien was out of town. Kellogg observed firsthand exactly what Trump was saying and doing during the Capitol insurrection. The committee really wants to talk to him, and he was just subpoenaed, Wolf.
Is this problematic, all this excellent reporting of yours, for Pence's political future?
No question. This is a political tightrope. Look, it's no secret that Mike Pence wants to run for president or is exploring that, but any public cooperating with the January 6th committee is not going to be popular with Trump's base. So what we're seeing here in Pence world is clearly they are engaging with the committee, and there's no question the committee wants to talk to them, but they don't want it to be public, Wolf.
All right, Jamie, I want you to stay with us. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin. He's the author of True Crimes and Misdemeanors, the investigation of Donald Trump. Also with us, CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman, the Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Maggie, there's been serious tension, as we know, between former President Trump and former Vice President Pence since the attack that day. Will the level of cooperation from Pence aides reflect that?
Well, there's actually less tension between Pence and Trump directly, despite everything that happened, than there is between the 2 camps. I do think that this is going to cause more friction. I think that Trump in particular does not want to see Pence's folks go talk to the committee. These are not all identical advisors. Keith Kellogg, yes, he was in the Oval Office, but Keith Kellogg is widely seen among Pence's aides and among people outside Pence's circle as candidly more loyal to Trump than he is to Pence. And so and among the questions people had, I understand that Robert O'Brien was at Southcom that day and was not available, and that's why Kellogg was ostensibly there. But the fact that Kellogg was there in the tent and, you know, at the rally and observing all of these things and not really focused on Pence raised a lot of questions for Pence's folks. So I think you potentially are going to see a schism within the aides, and I don't quite know what that looks like.
That's a good point. You know, Jeffrey, the committee says Pence's national security advisor has what they call direct information on former President Trump's statements about and reaction to the Capitol insurrection. How useful could these witnesses be to this overall investigation?
Well, they could be very useful, but the key issue is, as Jamie was pointing out, some of them may actually be willing to testify because of the legal structure of how this investigation is proceeding. Anyone who decides to fight these subpoenas in court is likely to be able to run out the clock. If these Pence aides willingly testify under subpoena or just without a subpoena, that could be of enormous benefit to the committee. But they are going to have to decide whether they want to risk the wrath of Trump and participate in the investigation and talk to investigators.
You know, Maggie, on Trump's White House documents, you heard that forceful rejection of Trump's arguments from the judge saying, and I'm quoting now, presidents are not kings and plaintiff is not president. That has to be hard for former President Trump to wrap his head around, doesn't it?
Look, I don't think that Trump ever likes being reminded that he's not president, and I certainly think that hearing it in a legal decision is not going to sit well. I think, unsurprisingly, you're going to see Trump continue to try to fight this. As Jeffrey said, there is a running out the clock strategy here. You know, his folks talk about the importance of trying to set legal precedent related to former presidents and executive privilege, and that's fine, but this is also a strategy Trump has had many times. None of this, you know, is helpful to Trump in terms of it simply reminding him that he is not president anymore. He has, however, Wolf, I would point out, begun this very aggressive effort to try to rewrite what took place on January 6th, rewrite what was happening at the Capitol, rewrite why it was taking place, rewrite whether there was violence or not. And I think that is that's taking place in front of our eyes as opposed to just with committee witnesses.
You know, Jeffrey, the Trump legal team clearly is appealing all of this. How will that work? Will they be able to stop these documents from being handed over to the House of Representatives by Friday?
You know, this is the first moment where the committee really has the upper hand legally, because they now hold in their hands a decision from the district court in Washington saying that the National Archives has to start turning over these documents on Friday. So the status quo means the committee gets the documents. The issue here is, what will the D.C. Circuit do? The Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, they will be asked to issue a stay, and it's enormously important, because if they don't issue a stay, it means the committees start to be the documents start to be produced. If they do issue a stay, it likely means months of delay. So in the next 24 to 48 hours, we should know whether this stay is issued, and it's enormously important for the future of this investigation, how that goes.
You know, Jamie, even if some of these high-profile witnesses don't cooperate, how revealing could it be for this committee to see those White House documents, call logs, schedules, even handwritten notes?
Absolutely critical. Is exactly the kind of pieces of the puzzle that could lead them someplace. And I just want to say one other thing about engaging with the committee. Some people may agree to testify, some people may come up with subpoenas, but we may see some of these people, not only in Pence world, but other witnesses, quietly talking to the committee and pointing them in the right direction.